afternoon, students. In continuation with the online lecture series, we are now moving on to topics on blood. So we start with the drugs affecting coagulation, bleeding and thrombosis. So in this topic, the learning outcome would be the basic pharmacology of anticoagulant, fibrinolytic and antiplatelet drugs. In the lesson outline, what we would go through: disorders of inappropriate blood clotting, thrombosis in brief, drugs developed to prevent and or reverse thrombus formation, anticoagulants, thrombolytic agents and antiplatelet agents. So let's start with drugs and blood clotting. So what is normal hemostatic process? You have read in your physiology classes what happens in the normal hemostatic process. So when there is a vasoconstriction, it reduces the blood flow and therefore reduces the blood loss. Whenever there is a platelet plug formation, it will be involving platelet adhesions, platelet release reaction and platelet aggregation. Whenever there is a stable clot formation or a coagulation cascade, what does it mean? It is the end result and is the activation of thrombi. And what is thrombi? Thrombin is which converts soluble fibrinogen to insoluble fibrin and induces more platelet recruitment and activation. So normal fibrinolytic mechanism. So this is a balance whenever there is a clotting or a bleeding process. So what happens in the thrombosis? Thrombosis will not be natural. It is a pathogenic state in which there is the hemostatic process are activated, but they are inappropriately activated. That is, they are not needed where they should not be activated, but they have become activated. What happens and when it happens? It is there in the atrial fibrillation, whenever there is a deep vein thrombosis, whenever there is a pulmonary embolus, or there is a myocardial infarction. So the balance is tipped towards the procoagulant process and bleeding. Thrombosis is always a pathogenic state in which the normal hemostatic processes are activated inappropriately. So, as I said, these four factors: atrial fibrillation, deep vein thrombosis, pulmonary embolism and myocardial infarction. So, what do we do when these are procoagulant settings? Then we have certain drug groups available, pharmacological agent which can be used, so they come handy, and they are the anticoagulants, antiplatelet agents and fibrinolytic agents. So clotting will be shifted towards the bleeding. That is, it doesn't mean that we want the organ or the system to bleed, but the procoagulant and the bleeding system will become balanced then. So let us go quickly through the formation of the thrombus. You have already read in your physiology and you are reading in your pathology classes. So thrombus is a blood clot formed in vivo, that is inside the human vessels, and it has a distinct structure. Either it has a white head and it has a red tail. So there are two main types of thrombus, you know. As we have two types of vessels, arteries and veins, so you have arterial thrombus and you have venous thrombus. This is the picture which is showing the cut section. Then in the arterial thrombus, what is briefly we will talk about it. It has a large head and is formed from platelets. And what is the primary trigger? Primary trigger of arterial thrombosis is rupture of an atherosclerotic plaque, as here seen in the yellow. And this is the cut section. And whenever there is an arterial thrombus, it is mostly treated with the antiplatelet drugs. And then when we come to the venous thrombus, this consists of arterial thrombus. There is platelet clumping of platelets. In venous thrombus, it consists of fibrin web, and this is enmeshed with red blood cells and platelets. That is, fibrin web is here, which is not there in the arterial thrombus. And what happens in this venous thrombus is that tail end can break off, and then it flows with the flow of the blood and can get lodged some other place also, which is called as embolism. So this is the abnormal flow whenever there is a obstruction. So this is the altered wall, increase in the coagulability, erythrocytes get enmeshed in the fibrin web, and this is the picture of a thromboembolus filling up pulmonary artery. So this is also mainly treated with anticoagulant drugs. The arterial thrombus is treated with the antiplatelet drug, the venous thrombus is treated with the anticoagulant drugs. So how do we prevent or reverse the thrombus formation? So there are three classes of drugs available. One class is the anticoagulant, the other class is the antiplatelet agent, and the third class is the fibrinolytic agent. In the anticoagulants, we have many drugs. For example, only a few I have mentioned here: heparin, low molecular weight heparin, warfarin, etc. What they do is they modify the blood clotting mechanism. The normal coagulation cascade is altered by the anticoagulant drugs. In the antiplatelet agents, you have, for example, aspirin, clopidogrel, etc. Many other drugs are also there. Then fibrinolytic agents, these are streptokinase, urokinase, altiplase, etc. What they do? They break down the fibrin. This is the basic coagulation path cascade: intrinsic pathway, extrinsic pathway. Whenever there is a blood vessel injury in the intrinsic pathway, the injured vessel will act on the factor 12. It will activate it to factor 12A, which will activate the 11th to 11A, which will activate 9, 9 to 9A, then 10 to 10A, and this 10A will act on the prothrombin and convert it into thrombin, which acts on the fibrinogen to convert it into fibrin monomer, and this causes the fibrin polymer. And in the extrinsic pathway, this is the intrinsic pathway happening inside your body along the normal repair process. This is the extrinsic pathway when a person gets injured and there is a tissue injury. So there is a tissue factor release. This tissue factor releases the thromboplastin, which acts at the seventh factor of the blood, converts it into 7A, which will act on the 10th factor, will convert it into 10A, and again the same, this is the common pathway. All these factors, 10A, 11A, 9A, 10A and thrombin, these factors are affected by heparin, whereas the factor 7 and factor 10 is vitamin K dependent factors, and they are also affected by the oral anticoagulants like warfarin. So coming to the coagulants, since we are talking about anticoagulants and coagulation process, so there has to be some aspect or some drugs which are procoagulant and some which are anticoagulant. So we'll start with the coagulants. So whenever there is a bleeding process and problem, then what we can do is we can always give fresh whole blood or plasma. It has got all the factors and they can help in the coagulation process. That is, if a person is bleeding excessively and it is not stopping because of some reason or the other, we can give fresh whole blood or plasma, which will stop the bleeding because it has all the factors which are needed for the coagulation to occur. Coming to the drugs which are procoagulant, we have vitamin K, and this can be acquired from plants as well as synthetic varieties. So in the plants, these are the fat-soluble vitamin K1, phytonadinones, phylloquinone, and in synthetic it is K3. Fat-solubles are menadione, acetominophenone, water-soluble is menadione, sodium bisulfite, menadione sodium disulfosphate. In the miscellaneous, we can always give human fibrinogen, anti-hemophilic factor, desmopressin, adrenochrome, rustin, and ethamsilate, etc. Coming to the vitamin K, which is one of the important procoagulant vitamin. So, and we are getting it from the normal dietary intake as well as from the bacteria, colonic bacteria, which are in our gut, and they are friendly to us and they are making the vitamin K. So the daily requirement will be 50 to 100 microgram per day. If the colonic bacteria are making vitamin K, which is menaquinone K2, then they also make 50 to 100 microgram per day. So if the colonic bacteria production is adequate, then from outside in the diet you can take as low as 5 to 10 microgram per day and it will be sufficient for you What is the mechanism of action of vitamin K? In the last cascade we have seen here 9, 10, prothrombin, 7 and 10. These are all factor vitamin K dependent. So cofactor in liver for factor 2, 7, 9 and 10. Vitamin K dependency, what does it do? It changes the gamma carboxylation of glutamate, confers capacity to bind to calcium ion. What is the kinetics of the vitamin K? It is fat soluble, absorbed from the intestine via lymph, and it needs bile salt for absorption. If the vitamin K is water soluble variety, then it is directly coming to the portal blood. K1 comes by active transport, K2 and 3 by passive diffusion, and all the vitamin K are metabolized in liver by chain cleavage and glucuronide conjugation. So what happens if there is deficiency of vitamin K? Normally we don't have any deficiency of vitamin K, but whenever there is a deficiency, it is by causes lack of prothrombin and others. And whenever a person starts bleeding, this is the first sign of deficiency of vitamin K, and the person might have hematuria in the form of bleeding, GIT bleeding or epistaxis. So deficiency wise, we can see that the newborn is always vitamin K deficient, so we give routinely 2 injections of vitamin K. If a person is comatose and on parenteral nutrition or drugs, then vitamin K deficiency can occur. If you are giving heavy antibiotics, there is destruction of the colonial bacteria. They are unable to form the vitamin K inside your body, then you can have deficiency. If your liver is diseased, then you can have vitamin deficiency. If there is obstructive jaundice or there is malabsorption syndrome, then you can have vitamin K deficiency. And whenever we have certain issues or diseases, we use vitamin K as supplement. What are these issues? Whenever you have a malabsorption syndrome, you have a dietary deficiency, you have obstructive jaundice, somebody is a newborn baby, or there is an overdose of oral anticoagulant, which is 10 mg IM, then we give vitamin K in the dose of 10 mg by IM route, 5 mg 4 hourly. What are the side effects? That means most of the time, one should remember that fat-soluble vitamins are not to be used indiscriminately because they have side effects also, unlike the water-soluble ones which gets excreted by the urine. So in the adverse effects, you have flushing, breathlessness, fall in BP and sense of constriction in the chest. And Menadion K3 causes hemolysis in G6PD deficient patients. What are the other drugs which are procoagulant? You have human fibrinogen, which is used in hemophilia. You have anti-hemophilic factor globulin deficiency, where you can give anti-hemophilic factor globulin, human anti-hemophilic factor globulin. You can give desmopressin, factor 8 release hemophilia, adrenochrome monosemi carbazole, whenever there is epistaxis, hematuria, retinal hemorrhage. Then ethempsylate, this is an anti-hyaluronidase effect. This is also given in hematuria, epistaxis, melena, abortion, PPH and menorrhagia, etc. So this does not have action on the fibrin formation. Then there are another group of drugs which are called the local hemostatics. We call them striptics also. What is local hemostatic? Whenever there is certain procedure or as such also local oozing of the blood and we want to stop the bleeding, we most of the time press the area so that the bleeding stops. But at times it doesn't. So the procedures like tooth extraction, the tooth socket keeps oozing blood. Whenever there is some open wound superficial, then also there is some oozing of the blood. So in these cases we use local hemostatic agents. So this is meant only for the local application, and what this does is most provide a network of fibrin promoting coagulation. So where do we get these? Thrombin we get from bovine plasma, topically applied with gelatin sponge, operates as good hemostatic. We can have fibrin sealants. This is obtained from human plasma. This is even more promising. It stops the microbleeding and using in dental procedures. So fibrin sealant is quite popular among the dentists. Then you have gelatin foams. These can be soaked with saline, fibrin or thrombin to cover or pack bleeding surfaces. Then you have vasoconstrictors. If you remember from your autonomic nervous system classes, 1% epinephrine or 0.5% oxymetazoline. These are strong vasoconstrictors. So temporary hemostasis can be achieved. Epistaxis, you can pack a cotton gauze with 1% epinephrine or 0.5% oxymetazoline. Then you have astringents, under which comes the tannic acid, 1%, and is an effective hemostatic, precipitates protein and including thrombin. Then there is another option. You have Russell's Viper venom. This is rarely used nowadays. This also acts like thromboplastin. This is applied locally to stop bleeding. Now coming to the main topic of today's lecture, the anticoagulants. So we'll come to the classification. We have two modes of administration of anticoagulants. You can give them by parenteral route and you can give them by oral route. So in the parenteral anticoagulants, you have the heparin, the regular one, which is also called the unfractionated heparin. Then you have the next group of heparin, which is called low molecular weight heparin, under which there are many varieties nowadays: enoxaprins, dalteparin, ardiparin, nadoparin, pernaparin, reviparin, tinzaparin. So you must pronounce these drugs aloud so that you can speak up when you are asked in Viva and you can write the spellings properly in your exams. Then coming to the third variety of heparin, this is the synthetic heparin derivatives. These are the fondaparinux sodium and idraparinux sodium. These are the three varieties of heparins. Then you have direct thrombin inhibitors. These are pyridine-based thrombin inhibitors. Amongst them come the lepirudine, bivalirudine and deciridine. Then you have, this is pyridine-based, and the next is a synthetic thrombin inhibitors, under which is the drug ergotraben. And then you have dotricogen alpha. So these are all the parenteral anticoagulants. Then you have oral anticoagulants, which can be given orally. So under these also you have direct thrombin inhibitors, among which is the dabigatran etexylate. This is a pro-drug of dabigatran. Then there is a direct factor 10A inhibitors. These are rivaroxaban, apixaban, betrixaban, edoxaban. And then these are the vitamin K antagonists. If you remember, in the last slides I have said vitamin K as procoagulant. We are talking about anticoagulant now. So vitamin K antagonist will be anticoagulant, anti to vitamin K procoagulant activity. So you have coumarin derivatives, under which comes the warfarin, acinocumarol, ethyl biscumacetate, and indanidione derivatives, phenindione, ensindiones. These are rarely used nowadays. You must be aware, or it should be known to you, that whenever blood is collected for laboratory test, we put some anticoagulant in the vial in which the blood is collected so that doesn't clot. So that means the anticoagulants are used in vitro as well. So what are the anticoagulants used in vitro? You have heparin, you have sodium citrate used in blood banks to store blood, you have sodium oxalate and sodium editate. These are also used as anticoagulant in the laboratory. These are the tests for coagulation. For intrinsic, prothrombin time normal is 12 to 14 seconds and activated partial thrombin time. Extrinsic, you have APPTS 26 to 32 seconds, common in both. Coming to the heparin, which is the first drug in the parenteral anticoagulant group. What is heparin? This is a mixture of straight chain mucopolysaccharide. It has a molecular weight of 10,000 to 40,000. It contains polymers of two sulfated disaccharides, D-glucosamine and L-iduronate acid, and D-glucosamine, D-glucuronic acid. This is the strongest organic acid in our body, and it has got strong electronegative charges. It presents together with histamine in all this is present together with histamine in all tissue containing mast cells. And richest source of heparin is lung, liver and intestinal mucosa. So how heparin is commercially harvested? It is commercially harvested from slaughterhouses, from the ox lung and intestine of pig. This was initially. Now we have the biotechnical varieties. What is the mechanism of action of heparin? It has got a powerful and instant action, both in vivo as well as in vitro. Activates the antithrombin 3. Activates the antithrombin 3, which inactivates thrombin and similar cofactor. So what happens is heparin and antithrombin 3 complex will bind to the intrinsic and common factor and common pathway and not to the 7A, which is the extrinsics. Heparin and antithrombin 3 complex is binding to the intrinsic and the common pathway. It doesn't bind to the extrinsic. So it will be inactivating the thrombin. So in low concentration, what does heparin do? 10A mediated conversion of prothrombin to thrombin is affected. Inhibition of 10A and thrombin 2A, prolongation of activated partial thromboplastin time but not prothrombin prolongation. At high concentration, both APTT and PT are prolonged. What happens is, whenever there is antithrombin 3, normally it binds to the protease factors and forms a stable factor and then procoagulant, which is a slow. Antithrombin 3, it will normally bind to protease factor, it will form a stable factor, which is a suicidal inhibitor, and procoagulant, slow procoagulant activity between them. Long heparin molecule provides, if there is a long heparin molecule, it will provide scaffolding for 10A and 2A and also the antithrombin 3. And what it will do? It will induce the conformational change at the antithrombin 3. So, inhibition of 10A versus inhibition of 2A, selective 10A inhibition by low molecular weight heparin. We are talking about the unfractionated now. So, in the unfractionated, there is scaffolding of 10A and 2A and also antithrombin 3, whereas selective 10A inhibition is there in the low molecular weight heparin. And then there is lipemic action and there is antiplatelet action. In the kinetics of the drug, this is highly ionized and large, so it is not absorbed. That means we cannot give it orally. So it has to be given by parenteral route, IV or subcutaneously. It takes 60 minutes on a subcutaneous injection. Doesn't cross blood-brain barrier or the placenta. That means you can give it in pregnancy. It is safe. But of course, thrombophlebitis will be there because you are giving it by IV or SC. Mast cell release is destroyed by whenever histamine is released by the mast cells, it is destroyed by the macrophage. But the one which you are giving by IV and SC, its half-life is 1 hour after IV. So, and it could be long if a person is having cirrhosis of liver or kidney disease. Heparin is available in units. So, variable molecule size. 1 unit prevents 1 ml of citrated sheep plasma for 1 hour. That is 0.2 ml of calcium chloride, 1%. And heparin sodium, 1 milligram is equal to 120 to 140 units. So what are the doses? IV or bolus followed by continuous IV, 5,000 to 10,000 units followed by 750 to 1,000 units per hour continuous IV. IM or SC, IM should not be given because it can cause hematoma. So, subcutaneous dose may be used. What are the adverse effects of heparin? Because we are talking about the anticoagulant, that means it will not let the blood to coagulate. So obviously bleeding has to be the first side effect. So bleeding and hematuria, this is the first sign. Then there is thrombocytopenia. as we saw in the last slide, it causes from lipemic action and antiplatelet action. This so causes thrombocytopenia, abnormal antibodies activating platelets. There is transient reversible alloplasia to the patients. There can be osteoporosis if there is long-term use, and of course hypersensitivities can be always there. It will give rise to urticaria, rigor, fever, and even anaphylaxis. So heparin is to be contraindicated in all those patients who have bleeding tendencies. So all bleeding disorders are contraindicated. If a person has severe hypertension, then also it is contraindicated. In subacute bacterial endocarditis, this is contraindicated. If there is ocular or neurosurgery, you cannot give heparin. If there is cirrhosis and renal failure, you are not supposed to give an aspirin and other antiplatelet drugs already not letting the platelet work normally. If you give an anticoagulant which has effect on the platelets also, it will cascade into pro-coagulant effect and more bleeding. So it is contraindicated. So where these drugs are used? So uses of heparin, you have deep vein thrombosis and pulmonary embolism. Venous thrombus are fibrin thrombi, and we give anticoagulants. Prophylaxis of deep vein thrombosis, surgery, stroke, etc. In myocardial infarction, most of the time it is platelet thrombi, so we give heparin 2 to 8 days IV after coronary angioplasty and stent application. Cerebrovascular accidents also, it can be given, but it is of no value. It can at times be devastating, may be used in cerebral embolism. In unstable angina, you can give it for short term with an antiplatelet agent, and you can use it to maintain the patency of the cannula and stents in dialysis patients. In atrial fibrillation, in rheumatic heart disease, mainly warfarin and aspirin is used, and also in disseminated intravascular coagulation. Coming to the low molecular weight heparin, we have many varieties: ardiparin, dalteparin, enoxaparin, nitroparin, parnaparin, reviparin, and tinzaparin. So what is low molecular weight heparin? This is the fractionated heparin. Molecular weight is, you must appreciate, it is 3,000 to 7,000. The unfractionated one was 10,000 to 40,000. So what it does is, as we mentioned earlier, selectively inhibits the factor 10A, little effect on the 2A. So there is no scaffolding action. It brings together the factor antithrombin 3 and 2A. It has got very small effect on the activated partial thromboplastin time and the whole blood clotting time. So response is predictable. It has got lesser antiplatelet effect and so lesser thrombocytopenia, thereby lesser incidence of hemorrhage. What are the kinetics? It has got better subcutaneous bioavailability, half-life is prolonged, order of kinetics is first order, and you can give it once daily, and there is no laboratory monitoring. This is the beauty of low molecular weight heparin. Activated partial thromboplastin time is not required. Doses is in milligrams, not in units, and this can be calculated on body weight basis. Now coming to the antagonist to heparin. We have one antagonist, protamine sulfate. This is a strongly basic drug with low molecular weight, sourced from fish sperm. 1 milligram neutralizes 100 units of heparin. You have to judge the need, how much is needed. This is used infrequently now. Action of heparin, because on itself disappears because the half-life is 60 minutes, and if you give whole blood transfusion, then also the situation can be salvaged. So this is rarely used, and mainly it is used in cases of cardiac surgery where we need to terminate the actions quickly, and if there is no presence of heparin, then it can act as a weak anticoagulant also. This also releases histamine, and hypersensitive reaction can be there. Coming to the synthetic heparin derivative, we have fondaparinux sodium and idraparinux sodium. Idraperinox sodium is a long-acting congener of fondaparinux. It acts similar to it by binding with factor 10A. This is administered subcutaneously once weekly. The fondaparinux sodium is a synthetic pentasaccharide, an antithrombin 3 mediated selective inhibitor of factor 10A. This further inhibits thrombin formation. This is also administered subcutaneously daily. Doses are 2.5 mg. Bioavailability is 100%. Since we are giving by parenteral route, half-life is 17 to 21 hours, so it is quite long, and this is excreted unchanged in the urine. This also has lesser antiplatelet action, and chances of thrombocytopenia is quite less. What are the pros and cons of fondaparinux sodium? Pros is that it is a synthetic small molecule. There is little or no risk of hit. Some use in history of hit. Long duration of actions. Daily administration can be given. No routine monitoring. Easy dosing. No effect on thrombin or platelets. What are the side effects? Cons of the therapy. There is no reversal agent, unlike heparin where you have protamine sulfate. And this is limited only to parenteral administration. It has got a very long half-life, so if patient has got renal insufficiency, it will become longer. And if the patient has got low body weight, then it is contraindicated. Then we come to the direct thrombin inhibitors. Direct thrombin inhibitors are into two groups. One is the pyridine-based thrombin inhibitors, and the other is the synthetic thrombin inhibitors. The pyridine-based thrombin inhibitors are the lepirudine, bivalirudine, and desirudine. And in the synthetic thrombin inhibitors, you have ergotaroban. So, we are talking about direct thrombin inhibitors. So, what is thrombin? Thrombin is a protease inhibitor. What it does, it performs a number of functions in hemostasis process. It proteolytically cleaves fibrinogen to fibrin. It activates factor 13, which cross-links fibrin polymer to a stable clot. It activates platelets, and it induces endothelial release of prostaglandin, prostacyclin 2, DPA, and PAI-1. Direct thrombin inhibitors are expected to have a profound effect on coagulation. How they act? Majority will act by binding to thrombin, as name is direct thrombin inhibitor, directly, and thereby inhibit its effect in the downstream of blood cascade. So these drugs neither bind to antithrombin 3 nor to other plasma proteins such as plaque factor. They only bind to the thrombin directly. Coming to the individual drugs, hyaluron and bivalirudine. Hyaluron is irreversible inhibitor of thrombin. It used to be obtained from the salivary gland of leech. The name is derived from that, leech hyaluronamedicinalis. So we call it hyaluron. And bivalirudine is a synthetic hyaluron-like peptide. This also acts as thrombin inhibitor. These are administered by IV route. It has got a rapid onset, short duration of action, 1 hour. Half-life is almost 25 minutes. This is used in percutaneous coronary angiography and angioplasty as an alternative to heparin. Coming to the next, lepirudine and desirudine. These are recombinant forms of hirudine derived from yeast cells. So we are not going to use the leech variety now. We have much more access to recombinant varieties. So these are much more used. So what lepirudine and desirudine does? Binding of lepirudine to thrombin will block the thrombin mediated activation of fibrinogen to form fibrin, and factor 13 to inhibit fibrin stabilization. That means the clot will not be formed, and if at all it is formed, it will not be stabilized. Half-life is here also short, and this is also administered IV, and it is also excreted by kidney. Used as anticoagulants in thrombotic events associated with heparin-induced thrombocytopenia in patients of thromboembolic disease, and here it is monitored by activated partial thromboplastin time. There are some unlabeled use of lipiridine and deciridine, which are in prevention of ischemic complications associated with unstable angina and acute MI, including those undergoing coronary stenting and percutaneous angiography and angioplasty. What are the adverse effects? All anticoagulants will have bleeding episodes, so increase hemorrhages, hematuria, and increase in the transaminases. Patient might develop antibody against thrombin and lepiridine complex, and this thrombin-lepiridine complex will not be cleared by the kidney, and it will stay inside the body only. This might result in enhanced anticoagulant effect, and they may limit long-term effectiveness of agents as anticoagulant. There is no antidote to this drug, but this is a better choice to patients of hepatic insufficiency because it is metabolized or excreted by the kidney. The fifth one is the deciridine. Like rapididine, blocks catalytic activity of thrombin, used to treat deep vein thrombosis and for prophylaxis against deep vein thrombosis during hip replacement. Then we have ergatroban. This is the synthetic variety. So, synthetic non-peptide molecule that inhibits thrombin. This is used for the prophylaxis and treatment of thrombosis in patients with heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, alternative to lipiridine, included in percutaneous coronary interventions. Here also, it's a short duration of action given by IV infusion, monitored by APTT, and when there is a renal insufficiency, then we give ergatroban. In the hepatic insufficiency, we give deciridine. This is to be remembered. Then you have deuterocoagin alpha. This is a human recombinant activated protein C. This inhibits factor 5A and 8A and limits the pathological thrombosis. Plasma half-life is very short, 1.5 hours. And besides its use as anticoagulant, this is given by continuous IV infusion also to reduce the mortality risk from severe sepsis, as the half-life is very short, 1.5 hours. And which is associated with organ dysfunction in adults. So this finishes your parenteral oral anticoagulants. Then we come to the oral anticoagulants. In oral anticoagulants also we have different variety. Direct thrombin inhibitors, in which comes the dabigatran etexylate, which is a prodrug of dabigatran. Then you have factor 10, direct factor 10 inhibitors. Rivaroxaban, apixaban, betrixaban and edoxaban, and you have vitamin K antagonist. In that you have coumarin derivated warfarin, which is one of the oldest drugs, 50 years of uses. Acinocumarol, ethyl biscumacetate. Then you have indendione derivatives, phenendione and isindiones. These are rarely used nowadays. So we come to the dabigatran etexylate. This is the direct thrombin inhibitor. What it does is the reversibly inhibits both the free and the clot-bound thrombin. The oral availability is 6%. So, after oral administration, dabigatran etexylate rapidly and completely converted to dabigatran by esterases, which are found in the IBCs. Plasma level will peak in 2 hours after drug administration. The half-life will be 14 to 17 hours. Once or twice daily it can be given. And the excretion is 80% of the drug gets excreted unchanged by the kidney, because the viability is only 6%, so most of the drug has to be excreted, so unchanged by the kidney. Co-administration of dabigatran etexylate and amiodarone, verapamil, quinidine, dronedarone will induce the strong inhibitors and increase dabigatran level. It should be taken with food or water to minimize dyspepsia. If a dose is missed, it should be taken within 6 hours. What are the common side effects? Drug is given orally, so it will cause indigestion, upset stomach or burning stomach pain. There can be allergic reaction including hives, rash and itching, and there can be bleeding because it is anticoagulant. Then comes the next group, which is the direct factor 10A inhibitors. So direct factor 10A inhibitors, here highly selective for factor 10A, inhibits free prothrombinase associated and clot associated factor 10A. No cofactor required, so no antithrombin. Direct effect on platelet aggregation. Here you can see. We can compare the new oral anticoagulants, dabigatran, apixaban, edoxaban and rivaroxaban. These are all coming to the direct factor 10A inhibitors. Bioavailability of dabigatran is 3.7%, apixaban is 50%, edoxaban is 62% and rivaroxaban is 80 to 100%. These two are taken with food. Time to maximum concentration will be for dabigatran 1 hour, for apixaban 3 to 4 hours, edoxaban 1 to 2 hours and rivaroxaban 2 to 4 hours. Half-lives are also different. This is the highest, dabigatran 12 to 17 hours, apixaban almost 12 hours, edoxaban 10 to 14 hours and rivaroxaban 5 to 9 hours. In the elderly, because the kidneys are not working, so 11 to 13 hours elderly. Drug interaction concerns P-glycoprotein, hepatic CYP and P-glycoprotein. Mostly it is CYP and P-glycoprotein. Adjustment for renal function is to be done in all the group drugs, because it is to be 80% is excreted by kidney, and if creatine clearance is less than 15 mg per ml, then dabigatran is to be avoided. When serum creatinine is more than 1.5, including ESR, more than 80 years, this is to be apixaban to be avoided. Edoxaban also to be avoided in certain condition. So other adjustments, older age, then extreme caution. Severe hepatic dysfunction, apixaban to be cautious. Edoxaban also, moderate to severe hepatic dysfunction, there has to be avoiding, and moderate to severe hepatic dysfunction, rivaroxaban also is to be avoided. Bleed rate, anything between 16 to 16.6%. Apixaban is the lowest, it has got 1 to 12%. Major bleeding by dabigatran is 3.3%. Apixaban has got less than 2%. Edoxaban also less than 2%, and rivaroxaban is less than 6%. What are the major or common side effects since we are talking about the oral anticoagulants? So GI distress, the highest in the dabigatran. Apixaban is well tolerated. Edoxaban, abnormal hepatic function test, skin rash, this is well tolerated. Effect on common coagulation, so prolonged PT, INR and PTT, ECT and TT reliable. So these are the details which you need not go into. Just for your knowledge, I have put up this slide. Then we must come to the pros and cons of the newer oral anticoagulants. They are very close to the ideal for an anticoagulant. They have got a rapid onset, they have got predictable dose response, there is no routine monitoring needed, oral dosing is there, they have minimal or tolerable non-bleeding side effects. But then there has to be some cons also. So what are the cons? Naturally these are new ones, so they will be expensive. The increased risk of bleeding with advancing age. Whenever there is elderly, then the risk is increasing, and whenever there is decrease in the renal function, the risk is increasing. And no reliable monitoring is there for adjustment or assessment of coagulation status. No data in special populations, that is valvular disease, prosthetic heart valves, hypercoagulant states, oncology, pediatrics, pregnancy. And reversal options are available, but they are very limited. So these are again the advantages and clinical. Rapid onset, no need for bridging, predictable anticoag, no need for routine monitoring, specific coagulant enzyme target, low risk of off-target adverse effect. So these are some of the. How do you reverse the new oral anticoagulants effects? No specific antidote is available. Limited studies are there. So laboratory correlation is not always indicative of positive clinical outcome. So correction of bleeding thrombotic events, dosing not established for all agents because these are the new drugs, and they have to be their use has to be minimized in the life-threatening bleeds because we don't have data of long uses. These are some of the reversals which can be used. For warfarin, you can reverse by vitamin K and 4-factor PCC. For heparin and low molecular weight heparin, you have protamine sulfate. Dabigatran, you have idrusizumab, apixaban, betrixaban, edoxaban, and evaroxaban. You have andexatin alpha and 4-factor PCC. Coming to the vitamin K antagonist. The first drug, coumarin derivative warfarin. This is one of the oldest drugs, has been used for more than 50 years. And the second is the indanidione derivative, phenindione, anisindiones. These are rarely used. So we'll focus on the warfarin, coumarin derivatives. So coumarin derivative, as I said, started in 1955. Originally found in sweet clover that was responsible for hemorrhagic death in cattle in 1930s. Similar compound was marketed as rat poison. Can you imagine? Only oral anticoagulant and the market for over 50 years. Extensive clinical trial data are there and provide experience for multiple indications. So, what is the mechanism of action? Competitive inhibitors of vitamin K, as I said in the classification, interferes with the regeneration of the active forms of vitamin K, essentially for carboxylation of clotting factor 2, 7, 9 and 10, as we discussed in vitamin K also, that it has effect on the 2, 7, 9 and 10, and it is competitive inhibitor of vitamin K. So these are the factors over which it will have effect. As well as natural anticoagulant protein C and protein S. Vitamin K, as it has effects on vitamin K, what does vitamin K do? We will repeat it again. Vitamin K is involved in the carboxylation of certain glutamate residues in proteins to form gamma carboxyglutamate residue. And carboxylation will enhance binding of clotting factor to calcium, leading to coagulation. So, synthesis of clotting factor diminishes within 2 to 4 hours of warfarin administration. The anticoagulant effects develops gradually over next 1 to 3 days. So therapeutic effects occurs only when synthesis of clotting factor is reduced to 40 to 50%. So this is the carboxy factor 7, 9 and 10, carboxylated 7, 9 and 10. Here reduced vitamin K, oxidized vitamin K. Here warfarin is in between NAD and NAD. pH. In the pharmacokinetics, this is a racemic warfarin sodium, the most popular oral RNS. S is more potent, metabolized by oxidation, completely absorbed from stomach, 99% is plasma protein bound, processed placenta and is secreted in milk, so you cannot give it in pregnant women. Then you have bis-hydroxycoumarin, dicumarol. This is also absorbed orally, metabolized in dose dependent. Half-life is prolonged at higher dose, has poor GI tolerance, available as 50 mg tablet, rarely used now. These are also acinocumarol, biscumacetate. Half-life is 8 hours, produces an active metabolite also. It's that active metabolites half-life is longer, 24 hours, so acts rapidly. What are the adverse effects of coumarin derivatives? Since they are procoagulant, that is anticoagulant, they do not let the coagulation occur, so obviously bleeding, epistaxis, hematuria, bleeding in GIT, internal hemorrhages, these are the adverse effects. How will you treat? You can stop the drug, stop the anticoagulant, you can give the whole fresh blood transfusion, you can give plasma replenishment, and you can give vitamin K. What are the factors which enhance the oral anticoagulant effect of warfarin? So if a person has malnutrition, prolonged antibiotic use, liver disease, low synthesis of clotting factor, patient is a newborn which already has low clotting factor, if the patient is a hyperthyroid patient, in which there is fast degradation of clotting factor, so these all factors enhance the effect of oral anticoagulants. What are the factors which decrease the effect of oral anticoagulant? If the person is a pregnant woman, then there will be delay. If there is a nephrotic syndrome, drug bound to plasma protein is lost in urine, so there will be decrease in the anticoagulant. What are the contraindications to oral anticoagulants? If a person is a pregnant woman, you cannot give it because it will cause skeletal abnormalities in the fetus. Fetal Warfarin syndrome will be produced, which is the hypoplasia of the nose, eye sockets, hand bones and growth retardation. So we cannot give it. Instead you can give heparin, which is not transmitted transplacentally. If given in later stage of pregnancy, it can cause CNS defect and fetal death. What are the drug interactions which can be caused by warfarin? It will be enhancing the anticoagulant action. Which drugs will be enhancing the anticoagulant action? So if you are using broad spectrum antibiotics, they will be killing the commensal bacteria producing vitamin K, so that will enhance the anticoagulant effect. Then there is new cephalosporin, that is moxalactam, cifomandole, produces hypoproteinuria by the same mechanism as warfarin. Then you have aspirin uses. Aspirin already inhibits the platelet aggregation in low doses. Also displaces warfarin from protein binding site. So more warfarin is available for acting as anticoagulant. And then you have phenylbutazone. This also decreases the protein binding of warfarin. If a person is using long-acting sulfonamides, indomethacin, phenytoin, probenecids, these are all competitors for protein binding. So more warfarin will be available for the user. If a person is using chloramphenicol, erythromycin, cimetidine, allopurinol, amiodarone, metronidazole, these all inhibit warfarin metabolism. So warfarin will be staying longer in the patient's body and will be acting longer. So that way the anticoagulant effect will be prolonged. If there is a tolbutamide and phenytoin uses, they also inhibit the warfarin metabolism. If there is a fenformin, anabolic steroid, quinidine, clofibrate, these all potentiate warfarin action. If a person is using liquid paraffin, then it reduces the absorption of potassium, vitamin K, which is a procoagulant. So anticoagulant will have an upper hand. So these are the drugs which will cause increase in the anticoagulant activity. Then coming to the reduced anticoagulant action, barbiturates and other hypnotics, which does not include benzodiazepine, rifampicin, bisulfalvin, induces the metabolism of oral anticoagulant. So less of the oral anticoagulant will be available and it will cause less anticoagulant effect. Oral contraceptives also increase the level of clotting factors. So that way procoagulant activity will have the upper hand. So anticoagulant activity will be less. What are the uses? These are used in deep vein thrombosis and pulmonary embolism, venous thrombi, fibrin thrombi, 3 months therapy. Post-stroke requires prophylaxis, myocardial infarction, arterial thrombi, platelet thrombi, not very beneficial, aspirin plus, heparin is followed by warfarin, rheumatic heart disease, auricular flutter, warfarin, low dose aspirin, low dose heparin. Cerebrovascular diseases, it has got little value, preferred in ischemic attack due to emboli, vascular surgery, prosthetic heart valves, retinal vessel thrombosis. Anticoagulants are given along with antiplatelet drugs for prevention of thromboembolism. Now, indendione derivatives, penindione and instediones, these are rarely used. So this comes to the end of part 1 of the lecture. Tomorrow we will be covering the antiplatelet and fibrinolytic agents. So be there. Thank you.